Good morning. My name is Jennifer Reed, and I am speaking about the Tennessee versus Garner case for my case study. The facts in the case says that in Memphis, Tennessee, on October 3rd, 1974, at 10:45 p.m., Officer Elton Hyman and his partner, Officer Wright, responded to a burglary call. When the officer arrived at the home, they seen a woman standing on the porch, gesturing towards the adjacent house. Where she had heard shattered glass and she had assumed that someone had broken in. Officer Wright stood at the front of the house to notify dispatch that they were at the residence, while Officer Hyman went towards the back of the neighboring house, where he heard a door slam and saw someone run across the backyard. The suspect stopped momentarily at the 6-foot chain link fence at the edge of the yard briefly, which gave Officer Elton time to use his flashlight to view the suspect's hands and face. The officer was able to see that the suspect had no sign of any weapon in sight and was sure that the suspect was unharmed. He originally believed that the suspect was about 17 or 18 years old at the time. While Garner was crouched at the base of the fence, Officer Elton called out, "Police, halt," and took a few steps towards the suspect. Convinced that he would get away if he made it over the fence, Officer Elton shot Garner in the back of the head. Garner was rushed to the hospital, where he died on the operating table. When the officer approached the fence, they found Edward Garner, an 8th grade student who was 15 years old at the time and weighed about 110 pounds, carrying a purse that had been stolen from the house, and only $10 was found on his body. Edward died because of the gunshot wound to his head, which petitioned his father to file a lawsuit. The holdings in this case is the issue is that the case raises concern as to why the officer would draw a deadly weapon after seeing that the suspect did not have a weapon in his hands after he shined his flashlight upon him. The officer can clearly see that the suspect was unarmed and trying to get away at the time, which tells me that the officer could have chosen a non-deadly weapon of choice to apprehend the suspect, like a taser or pepper spray. The officer would have only needed to be about 15 feet from the suspect to deploy his taser to stop the suspect at the time, and the rules for police use of non-deadly and deadly force differ. For non-deadly force, only reasonable force can be used. For deadly force, department policy must be strictly followed. If the officer had chosen to try to pepper spray the suspect, he would have only had needed to be 8 to 12 feet away from the suspect at the time. The use of deadly force to stop a felony suspect from fleeing is constitutionally unreasonable. Even though the suspect had burglarized a home, which is a serious crime, the moment that the Officer Elton seen that the suspect was not carrying a weapon, he could eventually assume that the suspect was not dangerous and did not cause any immediate threat to the officer or anyone else at the time. The suspect acted in fear of getting caught and ran to get away from the officer, which showed no immediate threat or therefore would have permitted the officer to use non-deadly force to subdue the suspect. Since the family did not pursue criminal prosecution where the officer who killed the suspect was being prosecuted for murder or anything like that, it became a civil case because the plaintiff sought for financial compensation for damages from the department and the state of Tennessee for Garner's death. The court would have had to decide the constitutionality of the use of deadly force to prevent escape of an unarmed suspect felon. Officer Elton was acting under the authority of the Tennessee statute and pursuant to police department policies at the time. The statute provides that if, after notice of the intent to arrest the defendant, he either flee or forcibly resist, the officer may use all the necessary means to effect the arrest. And that's according to Tennessee Code N 471. The department policy was slightly more restrictive than the statute, but still allowed the use of deadly force in the case of burglary. After being reviewed by the Memphis Police Firearms Review Board and presented to the grand jury, neither took any action. The lower court decided to uphold the constitutionality of Tennessee's fleeing felon rule, which at the time permitted the use of deadly force against fleeing suspects. Garner's father then sought for damages under 42 U.S.C. 1983 for asserted violations of Garner's constitutional rights. The complaint alleged that the shooting violated the 4th, 5th, and 8th and 14th Amendments of the United States Constitution. There was a bench trial that lasted about 3 days that dismissed the claims against the mayor and the director for lack of evidence and concluded that Hyman's actions were authorized and practicable means of preventing Garner's escape, stating that Garner had recklessly and heedlessly attempted to vault over the fence to escape, therefore assuming the risk of being fired upon. After the Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit affirmed regarding Hyman's finding that he had acted in good faith and was therefore within scope of the qualified immunity, the father of the suspect decided to continue to appeal. The district court concluded that Monell did not affect its decision. While acknowledging some doubt as to the possible immunity of the city, it found that the statute and Hyman's actions were constitutional. Given the conclusion, it declined to consider the policy or custom question. The Court of Appeals reversed and remanded it. This led to an appeal of the United States Supreme Court and inevitably led to a 1985 Supreme Court decision in the family's favor that the police can no longer shoot fleeing suspects unless they pose an immediate danger or threat. This new legal standard shifts notions of priority in law enforcement and momentarily reduces the number of unarmed people shot and killed by police officers. The use of deadly force or non-deadly is governed by the Constitution of the United States, particularly due to Process Clause of the 4th Amendment. The state law, usually the Penal Code or Code of Criminal Procedure, which defines when an officer may or may not legally use force. The judicial decisions specify what type of force can be used and when, and most importantly, departmental or agency rules. Reasoning. After a long uphill battle for justice, the court concluded that the use of deadly force to prevent the escape of apparently unarmed suspect felon was constitutionally unreasonable. That the suspect posed no immediate threat to the officer and no threat to others. The harm resulting from failing to apprehend him does not justify the use of deadly force, adding that a police officer may not seize an unarmed, non-dangerous suspect by shooting him dead. The Garner decision rendered unconstitutional the fleeing felon statutes is nearly half of the states, insofar as those statutes allow the use of police of deadly force to prevent the escape of a fleeing felon regardless of the circumstances. Fleeing felon statutes are constitutional only if they comply with the requirements set in Garner. This made a huge change in the policies and statutes put in place to protect suspected criminals from losing their life, as well as police officers from abusing their authority and trying to subdue a suspect. No one has to lose their life or be put in harm's way when interacting with police officers, and the police have policies and guidelines in place to make sure that both people are protected. Now, the use of deadly force in other circumstances in misdemeanor cases expose officers to possible criminal and civil liabilities because of raised questions of disproportionality. The classification of the Penal Code of the offense as a misdemeanor signifies that the state does not consider the act so serious as to warrant a more severe penalty, in which death would be considered too serious of a result to prevent the escape of a misdemeanor offender. Tennessee versus Garner made a significant change in the legal processes and policies when it came to seizure, arrest, deadly force, felony, and misdemeanor cases, because every system must comply with the changes being made for justice to be constitutionally reasonable. The justice system had made changes to protect the people, but we still have a long way to go. The Tennessee versus Garner case is a landmark case that applied the reasonableness standard to police use of deadly force. It paved the way for a decision in Graham versus Garner, which further limited the use of deadly force by law enforcement officers. And the case involved a police officer shooting and killing an unarmed fleeing suspect named Garner. The ruling ensures that the courts consider whether a reasonable officer would have believed the suspect to be armed and dangerous when evaluating police shootings. I appreciate you guys for listening to this case today, because this case has been monumental in changing the policies and procedures that not only protects the police officers, but protects the people, the civilians. This is important because we all want to feel safe and out of harm's way. And that is the job of the police authority and police officials, is to protect and serve. So we want to make sure that we're all abiding by the laws and rules to save lives for everyone. Thank you.